Thank you, Madam President. I want to echo the comments of the previous speakers as well, and to heap gratitude and praise on the Minority Leader, my friend from Gloucester, who has been leading on this, as he always does, not just to identify a problem, but to seek solutions and to work hard to implement them. So I really want to thank the gentleman from Gloucester for his leadership, and to the previous speakers, to Senator Feingold and Senator Lovely as well, for the work that they've been doing on this. Again, painful conversations to have, as we just heard, but necessary for us in government to be able to turn tragedy and pain into purpose, to do what we can to make sure that nobody else has to deal with the pain that they've felt in many of these incidences over the years. I want to speak briefly, Madam President, about something that got put on my radar screen just a few years back. A family, the Aruda family, that hailed from Seekonk, which I once represented and now ably represented by the senator from Taunton. The Aruda family, 3 members of that family were killed by a wrong-way driver on Veterans Memorial Bridge in Somerset on Christmas Day in 2023. And I had read it in the paper, and I had seen the news, and you know, you think to yourself, wow, what tragedy. But then it becomes personalized when people reach out. I had a town councilor in North Attleboro who reached out to me right after that tragedy to advocate for legislation and to engage in a conversation to see what we could do as policymakers to ensure that that tragedy doesn't ever happen again. And he shared the story of his own family and his son, and the Arudas were friends with Councilor Donovan, and he explained to me how he was touched by it. Floriano Aruda, 73 years old, his 15-year-old grandson, Jacoby, and shortly thereafter, his grandmother, Donna, all passed away because of that accident. And as Councilor Donovan reached out to me as his senator and as friends for the Aruda family, he had talked about the emotional pain that the entire community was feeling. And he gave a quote to the local newspaper where he said, "For such good, kind, and decent people to die in such a senseless manner is inconceivable, but it is far too common." That last line struck me, far too common. So as I looked into legislation and met with other stakeholders, we started to look at the data and look at what was happening. And he was absolutely correct. It is far too common, and we heard all the previous speakers talk about all the different tragedies that we see across the Commonwealth. After that, another constituent reached out to me, again from my district, who was also touched by the tragedy with Floriano and Donna and Jacoby. And he shared a story about the experience of his son, who was a baseball teammate of Jacoby, a friend. And he talked about how all of those teammates from that AAU baseball team gathered at the wake, where all of these young people, and just picture this in your mind's eye, all these young people from this AAU baseball team who were celebrating being young and playing in sports, and their friend Jacoby living through all these experiences, bang, in a flash, in an instant, it was taken from them. The innocence of this young AAU baseball team who now found themselves at a wake. For many of them, and for this constituent who reached out, he said it was the first time that his son had gone to a wake. Open caskets of their friend Jacoby and his beloved grandparents. And he talked about how all of them under 16 years old, heartbreakingly, said their prayers, as they were instructed to do. You say your prayers and say your final goodbyes to your friend and your teammate and his loving grandparents. But then this constituent also said something that has stuck with me throughout my advocacy on this legislation. He said, "Sad hardly describes the situation, Senator, yet it also gives us an opportunity to turn tragedy into a turning point." Turn tragedy into a turning point. He continued on and he said, "My son will forever be scarred from the events of that evening and what happened to Jacoby and his family. But my only hope is that they did not die in vain. We cannot stop every tragedy," he said, "that may befall us, but we can do everything in our power to make them less likely." We heard from all the previous speakers, and again, I thank them for their leadership, because that is what we're doing with this amendment. We cannot, this isn't a magic wand. We can't just snap our fingers and say this is never going to happen again. But we can embrace technology, we can embrace smart policy, we can listen to our law enforcement partners and those that have to respond to these tragedies across the Commonwealth, and figure out a better way. Figure out a better way and be deliberate about making this less likely. Making wakes and funerals for law enforcement, as we just saw in the last couple of weeks, less likely. Making wakes for 15, 16-year-old kids going and mourning their teammate, less likely. We have the power to do that. We have the power to do that here in this chamber with this amendment, and I can think of no better way for us to be active and engaged in a budget debate than by doing what we should be doing, which is standing up for our constituents across Massachusetts that deserve every possible deterrent, every possible way for us to make this less likely. I appreciate, again, Madam President, the leadership of the Ways and Means Committee, who have been active, the chair himself, who represents the district in which this case happened in, saying if it's a priority for our members, it's a priority for the people in our districts, we're going to make it a priority in this budget discussion. To our Senate President and her team as well, and to all involved in this. And I hope, Madam President, that this amendment is unanimously adopted as we ourselves join with the families that have experienced tragedy across the Commonwealth, give them a little bit of a collective hug and say, we hear you, we're doing everything that we possibly can so that nobody else has to deal with this tragedy in the future. Thank you, Madam President.